they'll have the notes. They'll have their notes from the class, even if they missed it. All right. So the textbook we're using, okay, public speaking, which is, by the way, an excellent textbook. Guys, I'm going to tell you this. I have been through a number of these public speaking textbooks, and this is a good one. It's simple, it's straightforward, and it gives you really good practical advice. So I find it to be one of the best textbooks out there on the market. So Principles of Public Speaking by Kathleen Guermon. That's what we're using. All right, so let me begin by saying this. As far as the content of the course goes, we're all speakers in a way. We all have been communicating our entire life. In a sense, we are giving speeches as soon as we learn how to talk. So what can you learn in a public speaking class? Well, what we're looking at is not learning how to speak, or sort of say to speak in general. We're learning how to speak effectively and how to become better speakers, essentially. Because all of us have skills. Everyone starts at a different level. Somebody is a really good public speaker, maybe naturally. Some people are just naturally good at certain things they do. Somebody else is not. So somebody starts up here and somebody else starts right here. What I'm looking for is to bring you up a step wherever you are. I don't care that you get to the very top. That's not the goal of this class. The goal is to move up a few steps. And so as long as you do, I'm happy, because that improved your life and you learned what you needed to learn, and you moved up, from where you were. That's really the goal and the objective of my class, is to get you better than the way you came in, okay? So what does studying public speaking really entails? I mean, studying from an academic perspective, what it's going to do is going to give you a really deep awareness of how complicated this process really is. It's not that simple. You think like, oh, I just open my mouth and speak my thoughts. Well, actually, it's very structured and organized way of communicating. So think of a speech class as a lab. That's what the authors of this textbook propose. Think of it as a place where you can practice and sort of say experiment with your skills. Try this out, try that out. Maybe you haven't done this before. So essentially, it's a place to practice, and also take advantage of this time to improve your skills, because this is one of the places where you're not going to just get, thumbs up or thumbs down, where people are going to tell you, oh, I don't like it, I don't agree with you, or something like that. You're going to get criticism that is constructive, because, we're not looking at whether I agree or disagree with you on what you said. We're looking at, okay, how was your speech structured? Did you hit this? Did you hit that? What you could have said or done that's a little bit different or better, and so it's all about improving your skills, okay? And as any skill, speaking becomes a better skill only as you practice it. The more you get up and speak in front of other people, the better you become. And it's just like, the more you do it, it's just like practicing any skill. It's like playing violin or soccer. The more you do it, the better you become. It's like that. It's just different people will progress at different levels, because there's obviously natural talents, involved as well. And there's limitations that sometimes we all have. So, I may be better soccer player and not as good of a violin player. So because I have fingers that don't want to bend or something like that, things like that. But one of the things that I'm hoping that this class will improve for you, and this is one of the areas that are really important to speaking, is your critical listening skills. Okay, because when we speak, we also listen. We become receivers of information as much as we give information as well. Okay, so we're going to practice listening. In fact, we're going to focus quite a bit on listening, on being good listeners, because in becoming better listeners, we will become better speakers. That's how we learn, essentially. And we will do a little bit of evaluation of other people's speeches. You're welcome to, throw in your things into the mix as well. If you want to look at the speech together or something like that and watch a few minutes and break it down, we can always do that just for fun. I love watching speeches done by, different famous people or anything like that that's currently in the news, and say, okay, how well are they doing based on this art, based on this technique of speaking? And we can all be a little bit critical of them in a good way, because we're not criticizing them for, essentially disagreeing with them. We are just criticizing them in the sense of evaluating what they're doing. All right. So, and then as you watch the speeches of others, and I want you to start focusing on kind of listening critically everything you do. Note how well people speak, and note what works. What moves you, what stirs you, what do you consider to be an effective way of presenting a topic or convincing somebody about something. So essentially, that's what studying public speaking is all about. Now, there's an aspect of public speaking that you have to understand that goes back way, way, way back into antiquity. Okay, basically, like in our liberal arts education in U.S., educational system in U.S. is built largely on speaking. Speaking is very important. Standing up in front of people and communicating verbally and vocally is a big deal. If you don't get that part, down, that you're most likely not going to succeed. Uh, and the reason is because this is a part of a Western culture that goes back thousands of years. Okay, so there's a quote in your book by a famous philosopher, Greek philosopher, whose name is Socrates, and he says this on page 4. He says, "The power to speak well is taken as the surest index of a sound understanding and discourse which is true, lawful, and just, and is the outward image of good and faithful soul." Now, I know that sounds like really verbose, like he says a lot in that statement. But what he's really trying to say is being able to speak well stands for something. It means something. And what it means is the person who's talking understands what in the world they're talking about. They're basically showing you who they are. They're showing you their soul, and they're showing you their understanding. Why? Because they stood up and they spoke their mind, and so it's meaningful. In a sense, you get to know people when you hear them speak. You get to know what they're like, what their values are, what do they find truly important in life. And so Socrates, is one of many um, Western thinkers, philosophers of the past, who deemed public speech as really important. And so, as you can imagine, in American education system, it continues to be an important trend, which is why people learn how to speak. In the past, people have taken classes how to be, oratory classes, how to be a good speaker, because people basically included that in their classical education. Like today, we learn math and reading and writing. Well, guess what? In ancient Greece, you took speech making, speech giving as one of your primary skills that you needed to go. Because if you knew how to do math, but you couldn't give a speech, nobody cared. You were an uneducated buffoon, basically. They're like, who is this guy? He can't even speak or make any sense. So speaking coherently, speaking convincingly, in the ancient world was considered to be a great value. And that's because how people got things done. That's how they showed their influence and communicated their ideas and got people to follow them. So in that sense, public speaking hasn't changed much. But I want you to realize how far back into Western culture this type of a exercise goes. So what is so special about public speaking? Let me see if I can highlight that for you. On pages 8 and following, the author talks about orality. Okay, and that's a key word that I want you to know. When we talk about communication and when we talk about public speaking in particular, we're talking about oral communication. There are many types of communication out there. There's nonverbal communication, for example, which we, by the way, use quite a bit when we give speeches. But orality and oral communication has to do with words and how we shape them and how we express our thoughts and ideas and how do we order them, and then obviously how we vocalize them. That's really what orality has to do with. So orality is very important in our culture, and it is a pervasive preference that exists today. If you think about it, the authors asked us in a textbook, why would people want to give live speeches? What's the big deal? Why can't the president just record a speech and play it on YouTube? You know, why does he have to do a live address to a live audience? You know, like even right now with all the crazy COVID stuff that's going on, why would the president hold a rally and address, you know, voters and people who would be supporting him and do this in a, you know, live environment rather than just shoot the speech on camera and play it for people later or send it to their, text it to them, you know, to their cell phones? I mean, why not give them a manuscript? Why not write a book or something? You know, why not send them an email? Why such a big deal about getting up and giving speech in front of people? And, you know, and the truth is, it's effective. Oral speaking touches us in a way that other things do not touch us. They get through to us. When we are communicating with somebody live, that communication is instantaneous and it's just happening right now. We are engaged in a way that we do not get engaged if we know we're watching something pre-recorded, something that was done you know, ahead of time. There's a certain sense of immediacy and energy to a speech that is live. So the talking to someone face to face basically works, and it works in very powerful interpersonal way. And that's why people prefer doing live speeches versus just communicating to you through emails or YouTube or something like that. So there's something really, really important. Groups come together, people come together, people feel a sense of connectivity through this participation in something that is happening right now. It happens live. And that is really the major characteristic of what we call orality, meaning that speech that is happening at the moment right now, and you're listening to it and you're part of it. You are a part of a speech when you're listening to a speech. That makes it special because you're there. So there are certain features that the authors of our textbook have noted on page 8 that I wanted to highlight for you about orality. So they write this: the speech tends to be integrative. Okay, and so we've already touched on that, in the sense that you get pulled in. It pulls you in. You're sharing in the experience of a speech, and so obviously that makes it more effective. Speech tends to be redundant, and that's very true. You will hear me repeat myself many times. I will say the same exact point, sometimes in 3 or 4 different ways. Sometimes it's kind of I call that a teacher's habit, because, you know, if there's something I really want you to understand it, I'll repeat it several times over, just to make sure that it gets in your mind, that it gets cemented, and you get it and you understand it. And so, but we do that all the time. All of us do that actually in speech. We repeat ourselves. Why do we repeat ourselves? Because we want clarity, because we want to be understood. We want to be, you know, we want to make sure that people are tracking with us. And so sometimes being repetitive is part of that. Not repetitive in the same thing that you keep repeating the same exact phrase, but repetitive in that you reiterate the same idea over and over with different words. So, because that brings clarity. So, and then speech tends to be concrete. Okay, what that means is when somebody's given a speech, they're talking about very specific events or specific people, something that sometimes the audience can visualize. Sometimes people are giving speeches on location in certain areas where they want to tie their speech to something that is happening right there and right then. You know, for example, when, you know, 9/11 happened, you know, President Bush traveled to the World Trade Center and stood right there on the ruins of the World Trade Center and spoke right there and addressed the nation. And the whole nation, I don't care if they liked him or they didn't like him, they were watching the president speak with just holding their breaths, because it wasn't that he even gave a great speech, but the fact that he was standing on the ruins of buildings that were brought down by the terrorists and so many people's lives were touched, people felt pulled into that speech emotionally right away, and that location made a big difference. So you're participating, you're connecting with what's happening, and sometimes these speeches, they're concrete because I can point to something and say, this is the spot, this is it, or this is why we need to clean up the earth, as I point to you to a dirty water bottle laying in the gutter right outside, or here, just walking a few feet off the road or something like that. Whatever, I can point to it and I just say, look, this is why what I say makes sense, and all of a sudden you connect to it in a different way. And then speech is situational. In a sense, you want to think about it this way. Every time you give a speech, you never really give the same speech twice, because the situation is going to be different next time you give it. And every moment is unique. It's filled with things that really have to do with right now. So, you keep noticing that as I'm talking and I'm introducing this chapter, I keep referring to the times we live in and COVID and things like that. Now, why? Because that's what's on my mind, but that's what's on your mind too. And that makes it real to us. And that makes this moment different and unique, because when I'll be teaching this class 2 years from now, hopefully I will not be talking about COVID, right? So that's the idea. So, yes, go ahead.
You said that on page 8, but I'm looking now on page 8.
Sorry,
I cannot
I misspoke. Page 6. Or I'm speaking about orality in public life, and I'm on page 6 still.
But
So
I have opened the Principles of Public Speaking 19th edition, the PDF, right?
Yes.
So on which one you are, on page 6? And
I was talking about orality in public life.
But what I have here is like the list of the table of contents.
Well, move a little further. Just keep moving into chapter 1. Okay, you'll see the headers.
It's different. Yeah, maybe it's different.
Yeah, sometimes the PDFs have different pages. So sorry. I wish I could adapt this for you, but I can't.
Okay. Now, I found chapter 1, speech and higher education.
Yes, the orality on public life is on page 29.
Page 29. Okay, there you go. You just got to keep moving. So that's the section that I was talking about. Sorry, I misled you there with the page numbers.
Don't worry.
Because I'm here sitting with a physical copy of the book. All right. Excellent. So so that's what I was covering. So the point of this whole entire section is that oral speaking is a very dynamic process. Unlike many other ways of communication, giving speeches, live speeches, is something quite dynamic, which is why we are so taken in by this particular type of communication. All right. That's really what I needed to highlight here. Now, go ahead.
I think that what you said on the live speaking is more what you said before, that why we not but when a speaker or a public person is looking to talk in live, because I think that it's more convincing when you can hear in real time what that person is saying. So it's more convincing, I think.
Yes, that's because we're sharing an experience.
Yes.
What connects us is that we're in the same moment. We're sharing that experience, and that's why participating in a live event, live speech is so much more meaningful to us. It makes more sense. We connect to it. So that's what I mean by the public speaking being dynamic versus me just taking a speech and recording it. It's not going to have the same impact.
Even if you are not like agree what the person is saying, you will remember that situation over and over again because you were there.
Right, so, you weren't there. So exactly. So this is what the authors are trying to say about the dynamics. The speech is dynamic in that way. It is a very unique form of communication that we practice. Now, with that dynamic also comes lots of possibilities for us to mess things up, but that's a different topic. So one thing about live speeches is when you mess up live, everybody knows you messed up. There's no cut. It's live. It is what it is. All right, so moving on, I'm moving on to the next section, basic elements in the speech making process now, okay? There's a chart over there that I want you to look at with me. It's called figure 1.1, okay? So under that section or somewhere in that section is a little diagram, okay? And that diagram has what we call an interactive process of speaking. That's what that chart is. There are 5 elements in this chart. 5 things that play into it, essentially. And what you have here is, first of all, the speaker. You could see on the left, and then you could see on the right is the listener. And what between them, what flows between them is the message. Whatever the speaker says to the listener is the message. But notice that something comes back to the speaker, and that's feedback. Feedback. A lot of times people think, and this is a mistaken thinking, that speaking is like a one-way street. But it isn't. It's a two-way street. Because whenever you speak to somebody, they're reacting to your speech. And you're actually taking in their reactions. And based on their reactions, you adapt. Your speech actually can change based on what you perceive your audience is doing. If everyone is bored, then you speed it up, or you crack a joke, or whatever, you know, to kind of make it more fun. You read your audience because they give you what we call feedback, right? So the speaker and the listener and the message are pretty straightforward ideas. We get that right away. It's the feedback that a lot of people are not, you know, aware of. And the feedback can be in any form. You know, it could be a thing like somebody's fallen asleep, you know, or it could be that somebody's frowning, you know, or they start checking out their cell phone or look at their watch, whatever. It could be many types of feedback, but a lot of times we have to be careful not to misread the feedback. Just because somebody's looking on their phone doesn't mean they don't like what you have to say or not interested. It's just they got a text from somebody they care about. So happens to be maybe a little bit more than you. So they look at that text because that's more important to them. Now, if they're just sitting there trolling, you know, Instagram or Facebook or something like that, then that's a different story. Then they really don't care what you have to say. But feedback could be deceptive to a speaker. We don't always interpret the feedback correctly. You know, I remember this one time I was speaking somewhere and the guy fell asleep. And he was like in the back row. He was an old guy. So as he fell asleep, his back tilted, his head tilted back, and he started snoring like crazy.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
it was like a hippopotamus making noise. Oh my goodness. All right. Let's see.
Someone is trying to.
We have another student coming in. All right. Excellent. Welcome to class. Let's see. I see you probably came in with your yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so which topic I have to speak on?
Yeah, welcome to class. I'm glad you finally got in.
Thank you, sir.
How do I pronounce your name? Teach me how to say your name correctly.
Sir, it's Mehreen, MEHREEN.
Okay, Mehreen. Good.
Yeah, Mehreen.
Oh, excellent. I love
Glad
it.
to see
Thank you for letting me know. That's sometimes I have trouble and I need a little help. Excellent. So welcome to class. I see that you came in with your regular email because you asked me for permission to enter, and I'm glad that I saw your little notification. If you log in with your student email, you wouldn't have to do that, okay?
Okay, sir.
So for future, when you come to the join screen, okay, you will see that at the right top corner is going to be like a little circle with your name in it, and it's going to say switch account. Because if you have your personal Gmail account, the browser always kicks you over to your personal account by default. And all you have to do is click that switch account button, and it will flip you over to your school account, and you use your school account to enter. And that way you won't have to ask me for permission because you just come into class without
Okay.
worries. All right. So for next time, I just want you to know how to do that. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. So we're going through our textbook right now in chapter 1, and I'm highlighting the section that's called Basic Elements in Speech Making Process, which your textbook is also available for you to download on the syllabus page there, so you can do that. All right, where I talked about is the feedback. So I was telling you guys a story that I'm making a speech, and this guy tilts his head backwards and starts snoring like a hippopotamus. And of course, at that point, I think I was a fairly inexperienced speaker, and I interpreted that as me being boring. But the truth was, the guy was just really tired, and he didn't sleep good at night, and he just fell asleep because he was exhausted. He had a bad night. He couldn't sleep. His back was hurting, and my speech just helped him relax. And he went to sleep and started snoring like crazy, which of course disturbed everyone else. And once they realized that he was snoring like a hippopotamus, they started elbowing him and told him to wake up, which was very funny and embarrassing for him. But for me, it was uncomfortable because I thought I put him to sleep, which is not the case. It had nothing to do with my speeches. It had to do with the fact that he was tired. So we don't always interpret feedback accurately, but we never ignore the feedback, okay?
Okay.
Then the other aspect of speech here, another element that is on your diagram on the figure 1.1 is context, okay? Now, what in the world is context? What do you guys think context really means?
Is the behavior that you are where you are typing.
Okay. What types of things could be context? Is it just the place where I'm speaking? Is it just the time that I'm speaking? What could be context?
All of them.
Yeah.
Contexts are like hints that the author gives for explaining his something, like for explaining his topic. For example, if I'm gonna speak on something, so I'm gonna give a context to help understand my speech.
Exactly. So context is whatever situation that might be relevant to what I'm saying that you need to know about to understand me better. So, for example, my context is I'm teaching right now from campus. In the upcoming weeks, I'm probably going to be teaching you actually from my home office, but right now I'm on campus here because I've been, working this whole week helping everybody else to get their classes working and everything like that. But, knowing that context, another week you see me and I have a totally different background, and that's because I'm working from my home office. And knowing context helps. So you might see me sitting over there sipping a mug of tea or something like that, and that will help you understand why and how come this is happening and things like that. So context is anything that clarifies a particular situation in which we find ourselves, and it helps us to understand the speaker better. Why? Because we put them in the right place, in the right context, in the right framework. So, and it could be a lot of different things, essentially. Okay, good. So this is our basic elements, and we'll actually expand on those elements a little bit later in class, some more. But right now, I want to move you guys a little bit further into the chapter, on to next section that's called Ethical Responsibilities for Speakers. Okay, and this is once again is going to take us back to Greece. As we talked earlier. It's public speaking is an ancient tradition, and Greeks were some of the first orators and first great speakers that impressed everyone with their speech and wisdom. So I'm going to focus on the word called ethos. Ethos. This is where we get our word ethics from. Okay. And what does the word ethos mean? Well, the authors tell us that all of speakers, anybody who makes a public speech, has responsibilities to their listeners. What sort of responsibilities? What does that mean? This is what we explain by the word ethos. Okay. Aristotle defined 3 factors that can influence others. And he defined them this way. The first one is logos. Logos is just a Greek word that means word, actually. It just means like word, like a speech, or a group of letters put together. But it really, what he meant by it is the ability to develop logical claims and supporting evidence. So think of logos as logical claims, ideas that you express. Then the next word is ethos. Ethos is credibility, which you as the speaker basically portray and generate, okay? And the third one is pathos. And pathos has to do with the emotion and the feeling that you create as a speaker. So if you think about it, when you speak, you are touching these three aspects: the things you say, the logical claims that you make, okay? Then the feeling that you bring to this whole entire exercise of speaking, because you can make people feel bad, you can make people feel sad and sorry, you can make people feel excited by your speech, right? You can create feelings in your speech. But then there's also ethos, and ethos is the credibility. You're just an entertainer just to say something to get a reaction out of people, or what you're saying actually makes sense. What you're saying has value to people, and this is that idea of ethics. This is that idea of ethos. Do you bring some sort of good, some credibility to this situation? So the way Greeks understood word ethos is a little bit different, I think, from how we understand word ethics, and this is where we kind of have to dig in to understand. All right. So again, we're still in Aristotle. Aristotle says that when a speaker demonstrates ethos, he does that by sharing a bond with others in a community. That is his good sense, his goodwill, and his good morals. And so once again, we run into this definition: good sense, goodwill, good morals. What does he mean by good sense? Well, it means that whatever you're saying, oops. If you have to mute, don't worry, you can mute. Okay, sometimes I get feedback. Good sense is that whatever you're saying has to make sense. It has to be logical. It has to be coherent. You can't just say gibberish. You just can't just make things up. Because what's the value of something that you just made up and it has no good sense? Nobody can understand what you're saying. What's the point of listening to you? Goodwill. Are what you're saying, the message that you're giving me, is directed towards me to hurt me or to bring something good into my life? Do you have goodwill towards me? Do you want me to do well? Do you want me to succeed? Are you saying this so that I can benefit, or are you saying it so that you can benefit perhaps from me or something like that? So that means that's the idea of goodwill. Are you giving me this message because this is something I can derive, some positive aspect from, or is it not? That's our ethical responsibility of goodwill towards our audience. And then, of course, good morals. And morals, by morals, we don't necessarily mean morals like, behavior necessarily. It is connected to the beliefs and the values, but it has more to do with our alignment with our audience. Are we on the same page with them? Are what we're suggesting to them, what we're saying in speech, is it forcing them to go outside of their normal, outside of their value system? Is what I'm asking them, proper, based on how they would see it? So I guess we'll touch a little bit more about this idea of morals, but this is essentially what the Greeks meant by this idea of ethos, our ethical obligation to make good sense, to have good disposition towards people, that what we're saying is not meant to hurt them, and then that to have some common ground, have some common values as we're speaking to them. Because if I don't embrace your values as the audience to some degree, or I can't find common values that we both embrace, then essentially you will reject my message, because what I'm trying to get you to do is to follow me into an area that you don't consider to be good for you. So why should you listen to me, essentially? So when we speak about morality or ethics in that sense, we're not speaking about personal morality or anything like that. That's not what we mean, because personal morality has more to do with behavior and doing good things or doing bad things, behaving well or misbehaving culturally, socially, things like that. So we do look at people's behavior, of course, but what we mean in a sense of studying communication and studying speech by good morals is connecting on the values that we share, okay? And it could be a superficial connection, perhaps, but it still has a connection if we want to be effective in speech. All right, so that's the idea. Let's see. The next section in the textbook talks about decision making and sort of say, how do we hit those moral bases? Moral basis of public decision making. Think about it this way: you have to speak in front of an audience, and you have to present these good morals. So that means you have to connect with them on some level. And when we say morals, we don't mean like good behavior, because we don't all behave the same way. We have different standards by which we live. But what is understood under that concept is like civility, meaning that we have to be civil. We don't have to argue. We don't have to fight. We can look out for each other's interests and look out for good of each other's interests and find some kind of common ground. So there are certain moral frames or ethical frames or certain values that we all embrace. For example, respecting another person, respecting their right to say what they want to say. So if I'm having a speech and you're having a speech, then I have to have a common decency and a civility to listen to you give a speech, even if I don't agree with you. I can't just rush to the stage and slap you on the head and say, get off of the stage, you fool. You can't possibly speak to me because, I don't agree with you. No, you let the person say what they want to say. You let them finish. You show civility. Why? Because you want them to show civility to you. You want to be heard too, because they disagree with you just as much as you disagree with them. So what happens if we start running up to each other and slapping each other on the head and saying, you can't say what you want to say? Nobody would listen to anybody ever. So you show people civility. You show them, sort of say, the respect that they need to have in order to be heard, because that's a value that we embrace. What you embrace is the value as that people deserve to be heard. If they're coherent, if they're logical, if what they're saying is not harmful or abusive, then they deserve to say what they're saying, and you should listen to it. Do you have to believe it? No. Do you have to agree with it? No. But you do, need to hear them out, because when you have to say those very things, same things, you would expect that they would hear you out. Otherwise, we basically do not have communication between people anymore. Nobody listens to anybody. And the world we live in simply will not work that way. So this is that common decency. That's that civility. This is what we mean by morality. And there are different types of moral frames, essentially, what we're talking about that's out there. A couple of pieces of advice that the authors of this textbook give in this section. They say, to be successful, you must find some moral frame to share with your listeners. Sometimes that is not an easy thing to do. Sometimes you realize that you're speaking in front of an audience that doesn't have as much in common with you. Sometimes, you realize that they do. And it's finding that foundation where you feel this way and they feel this way. And your feelings happen to correlate, and you can build on that, okay? But if your feelings don't correlate, then you can't, because then you have different values and you will not connect. So you find some area of agreement and you build on that agreement. And then you have actually an opportunity to be heard. That's what an effective speaker does. If he finds a common ground, he starts from there, even if what he says is going to be disagreeable. So, and then the other advice that they give is to find a shared moral frame. You must be true to what you believe. And what they mean by that is you can't change your moral frame. Just because your audience believes something, doesn't mean that you need to pander to them and all of a sudden say that you believe it too. You need to believe what you believe, but within your beliefs, within your values, you have to find that area of connection with them. You can't be untrue to yourself, because if you are untrue to yourself, you will destroy your credibility in speaking. Nobody's going to listen to you because they're going to say, he just says whatever I want to hear, which means, why should I listen to him? Because what he says is no longer true, it's no longer honest, and there's no value to it. He's manipulating me, and nobody wants to listen to a speech like that when they realize that they're being manipulated, they're being baited, essentially. And so it's a very difficult balance, I have to say, to be true to what you believe and still find a common ground with people who are not like you. It takes quite a bit of skill to do that, but that is the challenge of a good public speaker. Sometimes, well, a lot of times, we speak in front of audiences who are not hostile to us, who are not that different from us. But occasionally we find ourselves in front of audiences that are not like us, and that may be hostile to us, and may be hostile to the ideas that we express. And that's where a lot of, sort of say, tension can occur. But that's really what we mean by ethics. It's not all about morality and religious ethics per se. It's about being decent and about connecting with people on the level in which you are honest, yet you find something within their value system that you can build on. So you don't have to compromise your positions. You just have to find something that you agree on. And so the example that the authors give in this textbook is they talk about Pope John Paul, who was pretty staunch, and very conservative in his beliefs. And some of the people that he met with, some of the world leaders that he met with, were actually, they were all over the place. They were communist countries and dictators of all sorts, and he didn't really embrace their ideas or ideology per se, but he found something to build on, found some common ground, and that's how he was successful in getting through to some of those people. All right, so that's the gist of it. Yes, go ahead, jump in.
Are we gonna learn about this in the speaking? Look out, like now.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said. Can you repeat? You were just breaking up.
Sorry, sir. Have you played right now or stuff like how to speak?
Yeah. There's lots of information out there on how to speak, and I mean that's what this book is really all about. I mean, we dig into the theory of how to speak, and then towards the end of the course we get a chance to practice. That's the idea. All right, so this is pretty much the gist of the textbook. In the first chapter, I kind of run through some highlighted points here for you. There's one more section here that the authors really highlight one very, very simple understanding that everyone should have, and you probably already know this. This is not news for you. Is that basically the speech simply consists an orderly speech. Speech is always orderly. It's not just anything. It consists of an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. That's the pattern it follows. Okay, and then so you always introduce your ideas. Then in the body you develop your ideas, and in conclusion you summarize the ideas that you have developed. And that's pretty much the standard in speech making. Most people intuitively speak that way, whether they realize it or not. A lot of times it is a learned behavior by osmosis, by just being around other people who speak that way, because we copy what we see is effective. And so that is an effective way of speaking. So this pretty much covers our first chapter. As you guys can understand, this is just the beginning of the journey. And you're in this chapter, you're just being introduced to what is public speaking all about, what does it really entail, and we're looking at some few elements. Now next week, as we move forward, as you read chapter 2, we're going to talk about the mechanics, like subjects and things like that, developing your actual speaking material, the building blocks, sort of say, of speech. That's what we're going to cover. But this is just an introductory chapter. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Now, any sorts of questions or feedback, and if you began reading this text, I want to know, how do you feel about it? You know, if you find it to be challenging or kind of average, or, you know, what do you guys think? Clear?
I really loved it. It's something that maybe, in my opinion, I am not very aware of. That sometimes what we talk about, and I noticed that about ethos, that part was very interesting. But I am wondering how the, I don't know, the other students of your maybe last semester did with this, with the PDF, because I was trying to like. You told us that there were some parts, specific parts that were very important.
Mhm.
Do you remember at the beginning? And I was trying like to take them out, but I don't know. It's very difficult. I don't know if you have maybe a.
Don't worry about it. And don't make this too complicated. Nancy, don't make it too complicated. I hit the main points, and you know, and I highlight, you know, keywords, key terms. That's what you really need to pay attention to. Basically, think about it this way. If you understand a concept or an idea, that's really all I'm after.
Oh,
What I want you is to understand ideas and concepts.
okay.
If I say, you know, that there's 5 elements in, you know, in this, you know, chart that we talked about communication, and I name those elements, then you know what those elements mean. When I talk about feedback or context, you understand what that means. So as long as you understand what that means, nothing I'm going to ask you on the quiz is going to trip you up.
Okay. Yeah, because
you know what it means.
if you ask me for those 5 examples, let's say, or names,
Sure.
I'm gonna say, okay, I don't know. I have to learn them, because of course it's not something that I have.
But I'm not going to ask you questions like that. I always focus on meaning. Like, I may say feedback means this and this and this. And if that's not what you learned, then you say, no, that's not what it means. And that's really what it is, because I'm more focused on you understanding what that concept or idea or principle stands for, rather than you being able to produce a definition or anything like that. I know some professors ask you, define this or something like that. And if I ever ask you to define this, I'll say, define it in your own words. And as long as you give me something coherent and close enough, that's good enough for me. Because I'm not looking for you to memorize some textbook definition. I'm looking for you to understand it. If you can explain it in your own words, that's good for me. That's what I actually want. I think it was Albert Einstein who said, if you can't explain something complicated to a 5-year-old, you really don't understand it.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. I love it. Thank you.
That's the idea. That's the, you know, as you learn my personality, you know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for your comprehension of these ideas, because if you understand it, you will intuitively start using it and implementing it in your own life. That's really what it's about. Okay, so this is a very helpful book. I just want you to realize that we're going to talk about mechanics of speech making, all the building blocks, all the components. Don't get overwhelmed by the terminology. Don't get overwhelmed by all the technical aspects of it. As long as you get the big picture, you'll be fine, because speech making is an art. You don't learn it overnight. It's something that you grow into little by little. This course will make you aware of all the things that are out there, but in the end, you know, you will learn how to utilize some of them, and maybe some of them, you know, next time or something like that. So don't worry about it. All right, so I'm glad that you guys made it to class and everything is working. So I'm hoping that next week we have a few more students. I'm going to take this recording and post it for them as in the archive so they can have it as well. Send them a link. And let me stop the recording for now, since we're done with that.